What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here we are with another reaction. In this one, we have India, China going to war as Bhutan is invaded. Now, before we dive into this video and get the information, if you'd like to support this channel by becoming a member, all you gotta do is hit that join button to receive your exclusive benefits, and let's find out exactly what's going on.
While everyone's busy with Russia, China's invading Bhutan in a slow but calculated way. The CCP's interest in Bhutan is nothing new, and the Dragon of the East is unapologetic about its activities. China's been building roads and military installations on land that's not theirs, as you can see from these pictures. At the rate at which things are unraveling, we might wake up to find China and Bhutan merged. That's very bad news for India, because Bhutan sits extremely close to the strategic Indian land corridor called Chicken's Neck, right here on the map. This strip of land connects mainland India to its eastern section. China realizes that this is a vulnerability for New Delhi and wants to get its troops as close to the area as possible. To protect its safety, India has once sent troops to Bhutan and is now ready to go to war with China. So today, let's go over the origins of this border dispute between China and Bhutan, the manner of invasion that China's implementing, how India gets dragged into all this, and why I think that a war will be on the horizon if this issue remains as is.
So are they really like, I know India, China, it seems like videos I've been watching, tensions have consistently been building up, and I've been hoping that they can figure it out without having to go to war. Don't sound like they're gonna be able to. I don't know. Is this really gonna happen?
First, an important PSA. Any videos that talk about the CCP's failings tend to get swarmed with negative comments from bots as a CCP strategy to stop the spread of information that they may view as harmful to their image. That's why your likes are necessary, as they combat these bots and allow us to share these videos without fear or prejudice. So please drop a like down below. It takes just a second and it's completely free.
Freak, if that's the case, can y'all give me a like too? Just in case they send the bots here.
21st century land grabs can be handled in two ways, the Russian one or the Chinese one. Sure, you can do it the Russian way and launch an all-out full-scale attack, or you could do it subtly, like China. China's adopted a low-key but deadly strategy where they take a step-by-step approach to their invasions. We've seen it in action in the South China Sea, where their entire policy is revolved around building an artificial island here and seizing a disputed reef there until the world wakes up one day with massive ground stolen. And because of the covert nature of this, they avoid triggering a major conflict with their neighbors or Washington. It's this same subtle, aggressive foreign policy that we're now seeing China implementing in Bhutan. Beijing has been quietly sending in troops into Bhutan and building roads, housing, and military installations. Now, with fortifications built on another country's sovereign soil, we have the diplomatic issue of border disputes. But the truth of the matter is, much like all the lands they've taken before, this is an invasion into Bhutan. As with all things, we need to take a step back and dive into history a little bit to further understand. The seeds of this destruction we're now seeing were sown way back in the early 20th century. This was a time in which the exact borders of nations in the Himalayan region weren't clearly defined. Back then, the region was part of various empires and kingdoms, and borders were more fluid. Eventually, when the British took control of India, as they did most of the known world, they attempted to outline borders carefully so that they could split up areas amongst themselves. Even though they succeeded in most of the areas, in the mountainous terrains where Bhutan lies, they left a lot of areas unmapped and vague. In 1949, when the Chinese nation was founded, one of the priorities was to assert control and dominance over its borders. As a new nation, they were aggressive with this policy, and it's what ultimately led to the annexation of Tibet into China in 1950. This means they inherited the border issue between Tibet and Bhutan. The CCP tried to begin a border clarification process, but there were no ties between the two nations. Given its passive nature and its size, Bhutan had and still has a very limited foreign policy. In short, they preferred to stay isolated, and border disputes were not something they wanted to get into. I'm sure they would have preferred for things to remain this way, but, well, peace is not always an option when China's your neighbor.
Yeah.
As expected, the matter intensified in the decade that followed, as China started to draw official maps showing parts of Bhutan as Chinese territory. This
Like China, man, China. They draw your territory into their maps as their territory. They'll start naming your territory, as then it sounds like now they building infrastructure on territory that's not theirs. They're building housing. They're moving armies in, and they do it like you said in a slow, methodical manner, to where it just doesn't like ring all your alarm bells immediately, and everybody's like, we gotta stop. They do it so slow and subtle that what he say, you just wake up one day to find that China has taken your territory. That's crazy. That's wild. So is Bhutan, is this a separate nation? So this is a separate like nation or country from India and China, just between the two? Or what's going on with this land? Who occupies Bhutan at the moment?
was obviously concerning for Bhutan, but they didn't have formal diplomatic relations with China, so negotiations were tricky to say the least. Over the years, talks have been had, but they've yielded little to no results, with the most recent talks sparking embers that have not been viewed favorably by nations like India. Don't worry, we'll get to that in just a few minutes, and you'll understand why India is prepared to go to war over this. In fact, just so you know, it kind of already has. But first, let's talk about the contested lands that are at the center of all this. When you look at this map, you'll see that there are two main disputed areas that Bhutan and China are fighting over. These two main disputed areas are the western sector in the form of the Doklam Plateau and the central sector in the form of Jakhar Lung and Pasam Lung valleys. Let me explain a little more about that, starting with the ever so important Doklam Plateau. This is the most volatile of all the areas that are disputed, and it could be the sparking point that leads to an all-out war, as you'll soon see. Located in the western sector, this region is of great importance because of its proximity to the Siliguri Corridor. This corridor, also named the Chicken Neck, is a geopolitical and geo-economical corridor that connects the 7 states of northeast India to the rest of the Indian Republic. At its narrowest section, it's about 20 kilometers wide, making it an Achilles heel for India. If captured by the enemy, that would mean that essentially India would be cut off from its other states, making it a military and economic crisis. Unfortunately for India, the Doklam Plateau that China claims is theirs directly overlooks their Chicken Neck, meaning that if China were to occupy the place as they're now doing, it would be a military and economic disaster for India, given how the two nations aren't exactly the best of friends.
Yeah, India like, nah, they can't get that, dog. They can't have, and understandable why they can't have that land, because it puts them at such an advantage over India, in where that vulnerability of the Chicken Neck lies. And so, I mean, you understand India's standpoint of like, no, like we ready to go to war over that little bit of territory. We're ready to go to war over it because we're not letting you get your hands on that.
In fact, it's been said that the only reason China's interested in this area is just so that it can have a stronger strategic position against India. That's how you know there's bad blood here.
Yeah.
Imagine claiming territory in another country just to keep your enemy in check. That's crazy. India, however, does not take this potential threat lightly. In fact, back in 2017, things got very heated between China and India over Doklam, specifically because of this corridor. The whole incident was named the Doklam standoff. In June 2017, China decided to start building a road in Doklam, right in the disputed territory. Yes, you heard that right. China basically started infrastructure projects to solidify its claims in disputed areas and completely violated the sovereignty of Bhutan. With very few options, they turned to their big brother, India. Seeing China's road building as a potential threat to its own security, especially because of how close Doklam is to the Siliguri Corridor, India decided to step in. Indian troops crossed the border into Bhutan and blocked the Chinese engineers and workers from continuing with the construction. This led to a standoff with troops from both sides camping out for over 2 months. After
God.
weeks of
2
intense
months,
negotiations,
bro.
both sides agreed to a mutual disengagement. The troops from both India and China pulled back, and China stopped its road construction in Doklam, at least for the time being. The situation was de-escalated without any shots being fired, which was a huge relief.
Yeah.
Now, China may have stepped down in 2017, but it started its antics again in 2024.
Of course
As you
they
can see
did.
from these satellite images of the Pengda village and the Dramanan and Chakato villages, Chinese construction projects have continued in secret and have now made quite significant strides on another nation's soil. The second disputed area is the central sector, which includes areas like the Jakar Lung and Pasam Lung valleys. Now, before we get into that, I quickly wanted to answer
India finna have to step in again. India finna have to say, not happening, not happening. Got to send the army back out there. And if y'all want to have a standoff again for another 2 months before we we agree to disengagement again, let's do that. But at the same time, I don't know if I can trust y'all to hold true to your word. I don't know if y'all gonna leave Bhutan alone or y'all gonna try to sneak back in once we bring our army back. And so China very deceitful, and they very slick, sly, subtle with it. Very subtle with it. I think you about to go into a sponsor.
question I recently got asked. A lot of you guys want to start a YouTube channel, but you're...
Oh, we're going to skip the sponsor.
By clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. Areas around the Jakar Lung and Pasam Lung valleys. These areas are less well known compared to the Doklam area, but they are still significant for both countries due to their resources and strategic location. You see, the Jakar Lung and Pasam Lung valleys lie in the north-central part of Bhutan, close to the Tibetan border. This region is sparsely populated because of its rugged terrain, which makes it difficult to access.
Yeah, that don't look
Despite the remote nature of these
on.
valleys, they hold strategic importance for both China and Bhutan. On one hand, for Bhutan, these valleys are part of its traditional territory, and the country wants to maintain its sovereignty over them. On the other, for China, controlling these areas could be part of a broader strategy to secure its borders and exert influence in the Himalayan region. The Chinese think of it as a base of sorts from where they can push into the rest of the country. Put in a nutshell, when it comes to these areas, the main problem is the differing interpretations of where the boundary lies. As I mentioned, because of a lack of clear demarcations in the past, China is using this to deliberately go inland, thus violating its much smaller neighbor. Despite the ongoing discussions, China's built roads, buildings, and speculated military bases in these areas, showing that they're not open to losing them. This right here highlights what
China knows its borders. China know what borders they're supposed to have, but without it being marked, then China's like, hey, we're gonna try to take some of their property just for strategic advantages. It sounds like, and so for this one is not necessarily, I guess, about India. This one's necessarily to kind of invade Bhutan and get more control in the region and more influence in the Himalayas, and so to kind of invade the country slowly. And take over and let their influence and everything take over, which is absolutely wild.
One of Bhutan's major challenges. Because it's a small country with a population count of under 1 million and limited military capability, it relies heavily on diplomacy and its relationship with India to manage its border issues with China. But sometimes even that isn't enough. This bullying action by China was solidified by the fact that in 2020, China raised a new dispute over territory that had never come up in boundary talks earlier. In the virtual meeting of the Global Environment Facility, China objected to the grant for the Soktang Wildlife Sanctuary in eastern Bhutan's Trashi Gong district, claiming that the area was disputed. Naturally, Bhutan rejected the claim, pointing out the area had never featured in 24 previous rounds of boundary talks. Perhaps it's such things that make people say China has bullying tendencies in Asia. In any case, the Soktang Wildlife Sanctuary is being contested, and just like the other key areas, we'll have to wait and see what becomes of it. With all this said, let's now take a look at India's role in all this, and why they're as much a stakeholder as Bhutan in this conflict. You see, folks, India's support for Bhutan in this China-Bhutan border dispute is rooted in a combination of strategic, historical, and diplomatic factors.
Of course it is.
Firstly, as you may already know from my explanations earlier, India has strategic interests in the Doklam Plateau. India does not want China gaining access to the Siliguri corridor, as that would give them power to cut India off from its northeastern states.
Can't have that.
That's why they'll give Bhutan as much help as it needs, as this is pivotal to their own state's security. In addition to that, because the only thing standing between India and China is that region in Bhutan, India views this small nation as a buffer state. If Bhutan were annexed by China like Tibet was, then India would face increased security challenges along its northern borders.
Yeah.
However, not all of the reasons are rooted in self-preservation, as there are deep ties between India and Bhutan. The two nations have had a long-standing relationship built on mutual respect, cooperation, and shared cultural and religious ties. Bhutan and India signed the Treaty of Friendship in 1949, which was updated in 2007. Making it even stronger and more important. Under this treaty, India agreed to guide Bhutan in its foreign relations and defense, while respecting Bhutan's sovereignty. This is especially important given that Bhutan does not like to deal with foreign policies, as the nation prefers to be neutral and peaceful. This is why
Bhutan said, we just want to keep to ourselves. We ain't trying to do no fighting. We ain't trying to be involved in any wars. We don't want to be involved in any negotiations with other countries. We don't want any. We just want to keep to ourselves. We want to hold on to our territory. We want to hold on to our land. And we want to just be at peace. But China will not leave them alone. China going to keep rewriting maps and keep rewriting maps until China got all of Bhutan. It seemed like not just them territories. It might start with them territories, but until they got it all, they're going to continue to rewrite maps. So Bhutan looking at India like, y'all, we need y'all. We need y'all. Modi, like, we got you, bro. Like, don't worry about us. We not coming to take over. We're not coming to influence. We just gonna come protect y'all against China.
India influences and guides Bhutan's foreign policy without taking away the smaller nation's autonomy. On top of this, the two nations also have strong economic and military ties. There's been free trade and commerce between the territories of India and Bhutan since the signing of the treaty between the government of India and the royal government of Bhutan in 1949. This economic activity has been so active that since 2014, India's merchandise trade, excluding electricity with Bhutan, has almost tripled, from $484 million in 2014 to 2015 to over $1.5 billion in 2022 to 2023. These figures count for about 73% of Bhutan's overall trade, with the trade balance in India's favor. So from the looks of it, they have both friendship and economic ties. On top of trade balances, India is the leading source of investments in Bhutan, comprising 50% of the country's total foreign direct investment. There are about 30 Indian companies in Bhutan operating in various sectors like banking, manufacturing, electricity generation, agri-food processing, ITs, pharmaceuticals, hospitality, and education. Basically, the ties run deep. I'm sure you get the picture. Adding to these economic ties are military ties, as India also helps train Bhutan's military. This close partnership means that Bhutan relies on India for support in critical situations, including border disputes with China, as the 2017 incident proved. Now, with military ties this close and shared concern over China, it makes sense that both India and Bhutan would put a unified effort into stopping this common enemy and ensure that their territorial integrity is respected. Something that we need to be aware of is that India's involvement doesn't just revolve around Bhutan. Let me explain. You must already know that India and China are both vying for the top spot in Asia, and historically they haven't been the best of friends. China especially has been quite ambitious in spreading its influence to the point where India views it as a serious threat. By helping Bhutan preserve its territories, India is acting as a counterbalance to Chinese influence. Left unchecked, China could swallow up Bhutan, thus making itself stronger and sparking a massive shift in the region's balance of power. Another major cause for concern for India is that Bhutan and China have been having conversations about potential diplomatic ties. The closer Bhutan grows to China as it fixes these issues, the higher the probability that it might draw away from India. Concerns that this newfound diplomacy may bring strategic implications are a big issue, and with everything that we've been discussing, you can understand why. If China develops
I can
economic
understand, India being of concern about that, and it's like, dang, it just show you, hey, when it comes to geopolitics, it ain't no loyalties, it ain't no, hey, we're ride or dies. It's what's best for my country at the moment. What's it? And the Bhutan say, hey, China, China is the side we want to stand on. They best for the. And then that's geopolitics. That's geopolitics.
ties with Bhutan, then what? When everything's said and done, India values its close relationship with Bhutan and has invested heavily in economic aid, military training, and infrastructure projects. The idea that China will swoop in now is completely unacceptable to them. On the other hand, Bhutan is aware of India's concerns and typically balances its relations with China and India carefully. Bhutan seeks to maintain good relations with both neighbors while protecting its own sovereignty. As long as Bhutan continues this balancing act and ensures that agreements with China do not negatively impact India's security, India is likely to be supportive, or at least not openly opposed of Bhutan's peace efforts with China. That's gonna be a tough act to accomplish.
Yeah.
With matters the way they are, I have a feeling we won't wait long to see how successful Bhutan's gonna be or if tides reverse and they themselves incur the wrath of India. I don't know how familiar you are with this, but there's an old Chinese policy named the Five Fingers of Tibet. It considers Tibet to be China's right-hand palm, with 5 fingers on its periphery, namely Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and Arunachal Pradesh. China viewed itself as having the responsibility to liberate these 5 fingers, no doubt a pretext for invasion.
Of course.
Though the policy now lies dormant, I wouldn't blame you for wondering if China's revived this policy, as it's on a devastating but silent warpath. As much as I hope for peace, I'm sure I'll be updating you soon as things unravel.
Exactly. I hope for peace as well. I would want them to figure out between each other, but I just think at this point, China just, it doesn't seem like their actions are portraying that they want peace. Their actions are portraying that they want to have the upper hand, that they want to have leverage, they want to have the advantage against India, and India, I don't think is having that. So time will tell what happens between these two countries. Let me know what you guys think will happen in the comment section. Let me know how you guys feel about this one. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to subscribe, get a video a thumbs up, and check out the next one. I'll see you guys next time.